Good afternoon,
Okay,
everyone, and welcome to the session of LitFestX with Olivier Lafont. Olivier is a French actor, author, and screenplay writer. He's published his first novel with Penguin, and which was shortlisted for the Tibor Jones South Asia Prize. He has also released Sweet Revenge on Kindle, and today we are launching, or rather doing a virtual book launch of his novelette, Purgatory. Olivia, welcome to LitFestX.
Hi, happy to be here.
And where are you doing the launch from, Olivia? Currently, where are you?
I'm in Bombay right now. Actually, I'm in
Okay.
Bombay, just got back from the Kumaon Lit Fest yesterday after some pretty hectic traveling. So here in Bombay and looking forward to the session.
Okay. Um, uh, Olivia, before you sort of flash the cover of your book Purgatory, tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about this novelette.
Well, Purgatory is a novelette that's, I mean, broadly in terms of setting, it's based in America. It's a modern story, so it's based in our time today. And it takes elements of Christian mythology, like, angels and demons, basically heaven and hell. And I've created a structure with, as the title suggests, purgatory, which is, the Christian concept of the afterlife and one of the bases of Christian religion. And basically, in terms of the story, it's an adventure epic about a young guy who suddenly realizes that he is in possession of what is called the gun of God, which is exactly what it implies, which is a weapon that God has created, which is then, of course, a supreme destructive weapon. And he finds himself eventually in possession of this weapon without knowing it, you see. So a lot of it is about this guy who feels very frustrated with life, that his life is not progressing, suddenly finds himself involved in, demons, and I mean, and not just small scale demons. These are the great archdemons of hell. The archangels of heaven have all come to this place, and he finds himself stuck in the middle of this fight after having lived what seems to be a fairly mundane life. And his own personal history is also wrapped up in that. He realizes he comes from a very specific and very heavy background and lineage, where he always thought he was just some guy. So that's broadly the story, the things that the story covers.
So your first novel was on Indian mythology,
Yes,
warrior, and
yes.
now you've taken, like you mentioned, Christian mythology. Did
Mhm.
you have to do a whole new level of research for the book, and how different was it to switch from Indian mythology to Christian mythology?
In terms of you see, I'm French. I've spent a lot of my life in India. I went to the American school in Delhi for most of my life, so I also have American culture. So there are three cultures I grew up with: French, Indian, and American. In terms of that, there's a basic familiarity I have with, the specific religions, like in the West, Christianity; in India, Hinduism, and Islam. So these are I have that background. My father is a historian, a French historian who specialized in the Indian subcontinent. So, uh, with his influence, of course, I know, I think, a fair amount about Indian history and religion and geopolitics and mythology, because he was classically trained. So he was raised on Greek and Roman mythology. He also knows everything about Indian mythology, and I think that also came to me. You see, so there was no difficulty in terms of broadly switching from one to the other. There was a great deal of research that went, into the specifics, especially for Warrior, because the many themes and many aspects of Shiva, and the history and the politics and all that. I did a really quite a good deal of research in there. For Purgatory, it's a much lighter treatment, so there wasn't as much in-depth research that was required. There was a fair amount for some of the specific characters who were from specific archetypes or personalities from Christian mythology, like specific archdemons, specific archangels. That kind of research went into it. So there wasn't really much. There wasn't some drastic switch that I had to do from one to the other that way.
So at this point in time, why don't you sort of unveil the cover of the book?
So it's just coming. This is the cover of my new novelette, Purgatory, The Gun of God.
Wow, it's a very interesting cover, Olivier. Clearly, I mean, when you say the gun of God and the kind of image that conjures up with the cover is very, very interesting. So congratulations there.
Thank you. The cover art was done by Gina Lafont, and to me, art and design, and to me, what the cover conveys is a very dramatic, but also very ambiguous figure, where you don't know, is it an angel, is it a demon, what is it threatening, is it spiritual? And for me, that exactly communicates the underlying tension in Purgatory, in the book, in the novelette, which is that there's this, you're not exactly sure who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, So that was one of the themes in the story, and I think the cover really kind of conveys that.
Absolutely. There's an old adage, which I'm sure we all know, saying don't judge a book by its cover. But I think in this case, the cover really, talks volumes about what the book possibly is. And
Yeah,
there's a certain sort of mystique, in the cover. And which I'm sure will prompt readers to pick it up and discover what's inside.
Well, I should hope so, yeah.
You mentioned about the fact that this is your first novelette as well. So why did you think about, you've done a novel before, you've done a Kindle book as well. This time around, why did you think about a novelette?
It was an experiment. It was a desire to try a slightly different form, which is shorter. See, like a short story has a very different form and impact, and whereas a novel, which are the two usually very obvious, polar opposites, and a novel gets very involved and in depth, and it's a novel, so it's a big story. What a novelette is for me is because it's of that slightly middle length, I have the ability to kind of get into this world and create this world, but give you a very quick sort of, it's like looking through a telescope, where you in one glimpse you get just a snapshot of the sky, but when you realize that little portion of the sky that you're seeing is, I don't know, 100 million galaxies, you suddenly go like, oh wow, in that one snapshot there's something very big that's happening over there,
Right. And today there's within fiction writing, the number of sort of subgenres that have emerged are just phenomenal. I mean, so where do you see then the differentiation coming in between fantasy fiction and mythological fiction? Are you seeing a big delineation there?
For me, the difference between mythological fiction and fantasy fiction, mythological fiction is culturally linked, because it talks about a very specific or several specific cultures. There are certain things to respect now, and I say that meaning, even if you write a story that that goes off track, that sort of trumps the mythology as you know it, there's still an acknowledgement of the existing structure of that mythology, right? So there are certain things to respect about what that mythology is. Whereas pure fantasy, if you go in that direction, is completely free. You're creating an entire world, and even there, there are certain things to respect in terms of who are people? You know, if you create a completely, I mean, utterly alien culture in your fantasy book, it's going to be difficult to connect. People will be, as human beings, will be trying to find points of reference in order to understand this, which is why a lot of fantasy is based, say, in a sort of medieval kind of setting with sword and sorcery and all that, because that's easily accessible for people, culturally speaking. So mythological fiction is much more rooted in the structures of an existing culture. You know, so for example, my book Warrior, I consider it a blend of mythological fiction and fantasy, and I was very careful to respect what are, you know, the various Indian mythologies. Hindu mythology is, of course, the biggest component of that, because the book is set in India. My hero Sam is a demigod, the son of Shiva. So that was something that was interesting to do, but that I also wanted to respect. So I wanted to start with Indian mythology, but also create in Warrior a kind of new world, you know, that then crosses that line into fantasy. You see, when you look at mythological fiction, what is also to be respected is the understanding of how the supernatural and the superpowers work. You see, generally in world mythologies, Indian mythologies and Western mythologies, the magic system, shall we say, how magic works and how these people are supernatural beings, is kind of left vague, because these are beings that were that are synonymous with, you know, like Indra, he's synonymous with the heavens and with the sky. They're synonymous with natural phenomena, you know. When you look at fantasy, then the magic system you create is entirely on your own. You can create something, you know, completely out there. For example, in Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time, the magic system is very clear. Women have these powers, men have these powers, and there's that gender kind of thing. So he's talking about gender at that level, you know. Whereas what I wanted to do was, again, create a kind of blend where the Hindu mythology in my book, there's a certain, you don't quite know how the magic works, but I've put little hints of it, like, you know, Sanskrit kind of, shall we say, runes, words of power. I've used that in my book. So I've done a little bit of keeping it kind of mysterious, but also giving a sense of a structure of magic, of how it works, you know?
Right. You know, you mentioned very interestingly some of the sort of differences between just broad fantasy and you know, mythofiction. Um, you know, there's so much of stuff happening even within nonfiction in India and abroad today. You know, in terms of writing, and people generally are finding you know, being short of time to sort of read. And so, in that sort of an environment where different genres, subgenres are competing for the reader's attention and time,
Yeah.
where do you see fantasy literature going? You know, not just in India, but globally as well.
My belief, I have the greatest belief in the power of the story, and I have no doubt in my mind that fantasy in the novel form will continue, whether it you know, I mean, now we're seeing the transition to you know, tablets and digital reading, which is why releasing Purgatory digitally made sense. But in the future, you know, how will it evolve and develop? I don't know. Will there be a return to the serialization of novels, which in the 19th century, you know, Alexandre Dumas, who wrote The Three Musketeers, and Victor Hugo, all these people were people who wrote serially, meaning one chapter would be published in a newspaper every week. That was how books were written. They were, you know, now what happened over time then is the full novels came out. Now we're seeing trends where people want to see shorter bites of stories, you know, so short stories which you can download, all these kind of things. These are all very exciting things because they're new forms of storytelling. But I do believe there will always be space for the fantasy novel or the mythological fiction novel. There will always be space for that one big novel story that people just want to jump into and sort of forget the rest of the world, which is, to me, is the point of all fiction literature. The point of fiction is to experience a new world, whether you want to experience it by leaving your world behind or as a reflection or a contrast to the world you're living in. There's always that need to explore a new world. I think we're all pioneers at heart. We all want to explore these new worlds.
Right. And so in your books, there's this sort of larger than life, catastrophic sort of ideas there. And is there a reason that you sort of build them in, or it just comes out?
Yes, yes. No, there is a reason. The concept of the catastrophe, of the cataclysm, is inherent in all mythologies. I think every mythology tries to explain the beginning of the world and the end of the world. So it's already there as a concept. For example, in Warrior, what happens is Sam is the son of Shiva. The story is set in modern day India today. So Sam is part of this kind of hidden community of demigods living in Bombay, and they live they're governed by a strict set of rules, so they can't reveal themselves to the mortals, to the humans they live amongst. So they live in hiding. And when the book starts, basically Shiva, who controls the end of the universe, that has been brought forward prematurely. So you see all these unnatural cataclysms which are heralding the end of the world. So it starts in Bombay at the end of summer, on the edge of the monsoon. So you had that summer heat that grinds people down that everyone in India is familiar with. And instead of the monsoon rain, there's a blizzard, a snowy blizzard that comes in and buries Bombay in snow. So that gives you that scale of, oh my God, things are unnatural. Something is really wrong with the world. And all these sort of other cataclysms are happening. It rains blood. It rains, frogs and snakes. There's a gigantic, cyclone that envelops the whole of Gujarat. The entire state is just in this cyclone. So these are the phenomena that I wanted to put in the story to show you the scale of, this is the end of the world. This is not a joke, in Purgatory as well, which is the novel that I'm releasing, you get that end of the world kind of cataclysm that's happening. Basically, the war of heaven versus hell comes down on earth. The Purgatory in the story is a bar in America, in North Dakota. It's a fairly remote place. It's a bar on the outskirts of a city. So it has its regular customers, and that's it. There is no one else. No one knows this bar. And it's called Purgatory, which in the Christian concept is this place where when you die, your spirit goes there and is sort of, traditionally speaking, is the place where you wait. And there's a spiritual process by which then you end up going to heaven, So it's kind of a waiting room while your spirit becomes cleansed, and then eventually you go on to heaven. Now, I have taken that and sort of transformed it into something else in the book, so that what I'm basically offering in Purgatory is Purgatory as a third alternative to heaven and hell, where it's not a waiting room anymore. It's not a place where you just go and chill after you die. This is a real place that where you die, you become part of what this new Purgatory is. So heaven and hell see, in my book, Purgatory as a competitor, as an opponent, because they're used to okay, either it's heaven or it's hell. Either you're good or you're bad. That's it. But Purgatory gives a third option. This Purgatory is the place where, in my book, where all the non-believing, non-practicing good people go. And it also speaks to the general spiritual religious trend, which you've seen mostly in the West very strongly. This kind of move away from traditional practicing religion, where people are still very spiritual, but they're kind of moved beyond, having to go to church on so many days and all of that. You see, so I'm offering Purgatory as this third option. So heaven and hell come down on this bar in America with their legions and their armies to destroy it. And my hero, Alex Warren, finds himself in the middle of this entire thing, you see. So for me, cataclysms and catastrophes, these kinds of end of the world cataclysms are very interesting in books, and especially in fantasy you find that a lot, because these are the biggest stakes there can be. There are no greater stakes than the end of the universe, which basically for us as human beings means the end of humanity, you know. So you see that in all religion. All religions have this end of the world, you know. And for the Norse Scandinavian mythologies, it's Ragnarok. For Hindu mythology, it's you know, the Shiva destroying the universe at the end of that cosmic cycle. So bringing that into, as a contrast, into our modern day, for me was very interesting and very exciting, you know. And then it's all part of a bundle, because then Sam, my hero in Warrior, as the son of Shiva, it falls upon him to save the world, you know. In Purgatory, it falls upon Alex Warren to you know, he just finds out that he's this guy who's, and the thing is, without trying to give anything away, the gun of God, this ultimate weapon created by God, which he should not have created this, falls upon him, you know. And he still doesn't know that it's in his possession, you know. So the entire story is that discovery of, man, who am I, and what does this all mean? But then the great thing is this cataclysmic thing that comes on this bar. It's just a bar in the middle of nowhere, off a road, and the entire the war between heaven and hell comes down and focuses on this bar.
You know, and of course, you know, to combat this catastrophic incident, then you've got some great, you know, heroism to sort of combat that. So what do you look for when you're creating your hero, and what is the kind of, what is the flavor of heroism that you believe in?
See, there's in terms of heroes and heroism, there's the very everyone knows what a hero is, at least in that superficial way. Everyone knows when you read a fantasy book that, you know, okay, the hero is this guy and he's a good guy, and he may, whatever his struggles are, and you know he's going to win in the end. These are the tropes that we're familiar with. When you see the X-Men movies, when you see the Avengers movies, when you see the Harry Potter movies, it's very clear who your hero is. There's that general understanding everyone has, right? When you look more specifically and more personally, for me, the real defining thing about a hero is the matter of the principles, which is, what are the principles, the values that this person stands for, you know? And for me, it goes a step beyond that. For me, there's, in all my books, there's always a kind of discovery of self as you go along. What I mean is, it's not just that, you know, we all know what's good and bad. We've got these, you know, in every culture, you have these kind of general rules that, you know, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. It's very basic, right? It's easy to give lip service to these principles, to say, oh yeah, okay, so my hero doesn't steal, my hero doesn't kill. It's a very simple thing. But then the real thing is when his principles are tied in to integrally who he is, the person that he is, not just what a person pretends to be. You know, when these are values and principles that intrinsically mean something to him, you know, that are part of who he is, that is where that real motivation comes from. He's not, you know, the person isn't pretending to be good. The person is actually fighting for those principles. So in Warrior, you have that very clearly. My hero Sam is he's got his own personal history with his father Shiva, which explains his behavior, who he is. As he discovers more about himself and about his past, he begins to form a much more concrete grasp of what he stands for today, whereas he had left it kind of behind. You know, my hero in Purgatory, Alex Warren, all he wants at the beginning of the story, all he wants is to just get out of, you know, this really remote place he's living in, to take himself and his sister, because he's an orphan, to take himself and his sister away from this place to a better life. But he is fundamentally stuck. There's something that's keeping him here. There's a force that's keeping him here in this town and in Purgatory, the bar, which sorry, what was the question again? I hope I'm not going off track. It
No,
was
no,
hero and
no.
heroism. That's right. So what happens from the beginning to the end is as he discovers who he is fundamentally, he discovers things about his past, about his character. He begins to realize that there are certain values and principles that he has to live by. He can't just pay lip service and kind of, do this. And as the full responsibility of who he is and owning the gun of God and being in the middle of this fight comes on him, there has to be an acceptance of, okay, this is what I have to do. And that broadly is what you see in a lot of fiction, especially fantasy fiction, is that thing, the hero who has that realization of, oh, okay, this is what I have to do. And that choice comes. Do I run away or do I accept it? Do I fight? Do I carry this through to the end? And that in fiction especially is what it means to be a hero,
Very, very beautifully put, Olivier.
Thank
And
you.
we've got a few questions coming up on Twitter. I'm just going to pick one or two which we can respond to
Great.
quickly.
Absolutely.
It's going to show up on your screen now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
it says, what was your single source of inspiration, Indian mythology or world folklore?
I would have to say it was world folklore, because as I was growing up, all of these things were there in my growing up. Between my childhood in France and then my family moved from France to India when I was very young. So my childhood was really kind of bathed in these stories, not just mythologies of specific cultures in the world, but also mythologies of cartoons, animated films, feature films. I mean, Star Wars is kind of, everyone has that, in their background. So I think it really was world folklore. And then when my family moved from France to India, and I began to discover what India was to me, Hindu mythology, Indian stories were really my way of discovering India, of discovering this country. So Indian mythology was just came and really beautifully complemented my sense and my knowledge of world mythologies and world culture that way.
Right. We'll just take our last question,
Absolutely.
coming up on your screen now.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, what do you see yourself as, actor, writer, or bits of everything in one? And let me just also add to it that, how do you see your acting and writing sort of influencing each other?
I see myself mainly as a storyteller, of which acting and writing are different facets. So it's not like I'm a little bit of an actor and a little bit of a writer. I am fully an actor, and I'm fully a writer, and I'm fully a screenplay writer. When, for example, when I act, I'm also, the way I approach my character and the scene as it's presented to me is as a writer. And when I write, I'm enacting the scenes and the dialogues and everything. For me, I'm experiencing my writing very vividly as I write it, So these are kind of integral parts to me of who I am. So I think that kind of answers both questions, how, what do I see myself as, and how do acting and writing influence each other?
Right. Well, thank you so much, Olivier, for joining us at LitFestX. And, we hope that your novelette, Purgatory, does really, really well. We hope to see it on the bestseller charts very soon.
Yeah.
And look forward to seeing you on the big screen with some fantastic acting as you've always been doing.
Great. I was very happy to be part of this session, to be able to interact with people and talk about these things and release my new novelette, Purgatory. I'll just show you the cover one last time, because
Sure.
I think I really like the cover. And so this is my novelette, and those people who will go out and check it out, I hope they really like it. And I was very happy to take part of LitFestX, and hope, wish you a bright future in amongst festivals, and as a digital festival, I think it should be really big,
Great. Thank you, Olivier. All the best.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.